Call the December 7, 2017 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. A reminder that today is Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. It doesn't seem possible it was all that long ago, but it was a lifetime ago, and it's good that we remember. Kate, thank you for your chairing last month's meeting.
You're welcome. It was a work in progress.
I don't know, I used it for the entertainment value.
Oh,
and
great, thank you.
No, it was a good session. Administrator, would you call the roll, please?
Bagelman.
Here?
Dane.
Here.
French.
Here.
Gritters. Hagensick.
Here.
User.
Here.
Olson.
Here.
Payne.
Here.
Solheim.
Here.
Okay, you have a copy of the agenda that was available electronically. Do we have an approval?
I'll move.
Approval. Second.
We have motion and a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approving the agenda as distributed indicate yes.
Yes.
Those opposed, no. And the agenda is approved. The minutes of the November 2nd, 2017 meeting, they were also available. Any additions, corrections? And if not, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Those opposed, no. And the minutes of the November 2nd meeting are approved. Let's see, Ben. Up, communications?
Providing you with the 2018 meeting schedule for the upcoming calendar year. You can review that. The one change is the July 4 week. We're going to push that to July 12. A lot of people take their vacation during that time. So as such, we'll post July 12 as the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Other than that, it's going to be the first Thursday of every month.
Might want to go out and change that. The ones that you sent out into office has it on the whatever date it was. Fifth, yeah.
Really?
Oh, okay.
I went out to make a change on mine because I have it in the system too, and yours is in the system.
Okay, I'll double check that.
Yeah, it looks like the hard copy is right, but it's, but good catch. Anything else, Ben?
That's it.
Okay, we have no public hearing scheduled for this evening, but we do have some regular business. We're going to review and approve zoning ordinance amendment to C1 zoning district amending district language. City staff is requesting the commission to review and recommend action to the council on the request to amend the city code section 100.12 C1 neighborhood commercial district to better reflect the location of service-oriented businesses to be located within this area, in addition to schools, child care centers, and churches, with special provisional use considerations. This follows input gained from the commission at the November 2, 2017 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission, during which this item was tabled for further review by staff. So, Ben, if you would walk us through this, that would be appreciated.
You bet. So again, we're looking at section 100.12, the C1 commercial district. As we discussed during last month's meeting, some of the uses, frankly, were antiquated and no longer really usable. We had variety stores, laundrettes, delicatessen stores, things of that nature that really, nobody really understands what the function of those are in today's, society. So what we did is we took a hard look at that, and we're also trying to focus on saying, this is your introduction to commercial. And typically, if you look at the intent is going to be to provide for personal and professional offices, medical offices, where persons are served primarily by appointment, meaning you're not going to be drive up, after hours. And the hours are generally limited to 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. You're going to see these districts located in your residential areas should not include high traffic volume retail businesses, and so it's very clear. and primarily located, ironically, on arterial collector streets, with local streets being considered only in a limited circumstance. In other words, this is going to be your buffer area between either a busy corridor or commercial businesses adjacent to single-family residences, your low-density residential. So that's our intent with this. And you look at the character definition, we're going to expect these to be planned and designed to be in consistency with the character of the residential and commercial area it's in, to be a true transitional district. So in other words, the scale of buildings should be appropriate. So the permitted uses, we're calling them principal uses, are going to be your medical clinics and such, business and professional offices, very general, personal service businesses, basically beauty salons, barbershops, that sort of thing, and other uses that are consistent by type of the physical characteristics of those already listed uses. So we may not catch everything, but that's an attempt to say if it's very similar and functions very similar fashion, we should include that as a permitted use. And it would not come before the Planning and Zoning Commission or City Council for review if that is the case. And then we go into special provisional uses. We're expecting to locate churches, and similar places of worship, schools, colleges, public universities, childcare facilities. A lot of these are usually borderline commuter areas where they require large amounts of parking nowadays. Churches and schools, for example, used to be they were in your neighborhood and you walk to them. That's not the case anymore. They're usually pretty big and usually near arterial streets for easy access with vehicles. So that would be a special provisional use, meaning it would come before Planning and Zoning Commission for review and recommendation before it goes to the City Council, again, for review and then final approval. And they'd be expected to provide a site plan to comment on and see if what they're proposing would make sense for the characteristics of the neighborhood it's presented in. And then we go into dimensional requirements. We didn't change hardly anything except the rear yard setback. We changed it from 25 to 10 feet. Frankly, we didn't expect a 25-foot setback along the rear to be really needed. We're not going to expect any large dumpster containers nor large freight deliveries in the back of these buildings because primarily they're going to be professional type applications. And that's pretty much the highlights of what you have there. We did increase the height of allowable buildings from 2 stories to 3 stories because generally that's what we would allow in single-family residential. So in other words, it's in scale with what we would expect.
Then what I'd like to do is to have the commission take a look at the first section, applicability and purpose, and see if there are any comments, suggestions there, and then we'll move through each section. I think that'll keep us focused and hopefully have a healthy discussion. So any comments on section 100.12.01?
This doesn't affect at all like an in-home business, right? Because I know there's some salons or different things that are actually, and childcare that would still be under the R.
Well, we still permit
Whatever
those
ones.
as a home occupation. Those have their own standards.
Okay.
They're expected to basically fill out a form in our office so they can list how many square feet they're expecting to use out of their home. And the characteristics are it has to be a home first and foremost and a business secondary. So that's what we permit today.
Any other comments on that first piece?
So if you look at the north side of 10th Ave, is that now what? The
Zoning district?
Yeah, what is it?
The zoning district is C2 general commercial.
Okay.
And those are your primarily office type businesses.
But would we reclassify, would that be a typical C1 then?
Well, we wouldn't reclassify
I
them per
mean,
se,
yeah.
but that would be, I think, a good example of what you could see. They're providing for uses that are generally 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., generally by appointment. So yeah, that would fit the general criteria of a permissive use.
Except for the warehouse.
I was just going to say the
Except-
warehouse. Do
Well,
we
the
want
ware-
something in
right.
here about a warehouse or
Yeah.
no warehouse?
So in that situation, we would review that and say that may or may not meet the standard. I'm leaning towards would not because of the component where it talks about deliveries made by large semi-tractor trailers. You know, basically, you have to have enough space to maneuver one of those, and you know, and typically, we probably would look at, if we're going to look at new areas for general office-type applications, we then would probably look to rezone it as a C1 should somebody come forward, and we would probably recommend, especially if it's next to or adjacent to residential areas.
Anything else on that section? Let's go then to 100.12.02, uses. Anything there?
I think we need to, on B, take out CPA,
Okay,
put in accounting
counting.
or something more general rather than restrictive.
And that would be more generic and, good thought.
So with financial institutions, we would then be having a bank would be okay. Would there be concerns that, you know, not appointments or drive-throughs or traffic? And I'm just asking the question. I don't know that there is a specific, but when I think of that, I think of a full-service bank.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's true. But it's not a retail business. And I think that's kind of the difference. Yeah, they may sell products, but that's not typically how you look at a bank. So yeah, I mean, they're looking for visibility, I would think. Obviously, locating near residential would make sense if somebody wants to deposit money or go to an ATM nowadays. So I think it would work.
So there is no mention here of retail, really. And I'm not trying to be hung up on that north side of 10th Avenue, but that, you know, as I see what's developing along there, that feels C1-ish to me. But, I mean, there is a retail shop there, or would Two Guys not be considered a retail, or?
Well,
what?
yes, I mean, we would consider that a design slash retail operation. You can walk in and purchase items. I don't know if you can walk out with stuff,
It
but
just doesn't feel like it's described here in any way.
But it's also a warehouse, too. That's what it
Yeah,
is.
We would-
yeah, that's true.
Is the bank along 10th, is that a branch or is that a main bank, the main office?
not sure.
It's their main office.
Is there a
Main.
main? Okay.
They moved their charter from Shell Rock to there.
Because I'm thinking, you know, First National, I wouldn't want to see the main office in a C1, but, you know, the west office, which is more of a branch, would fit in more.
And you have, you know, you got, the only other thing is you got ATMs that are 24 hours. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's the other. It just says generally, so I think, okay.
So yeah, we try to choose language that would be somewhat permissive, but at the same time, try to give you a good sense for trying to narrow down what we're expecting, frankly, and to help you as well as commissioners to say, if something comes forward in your special provisional use section, does it seem similar? And that, you know, that would obviously be under the purview of the planning commission to review that request if it doesn't quite meet those standards, but, you know, it might make sense. So that's why we put that language in there. So it could be reviewed by chance that it may not be a big deal, frankly. So,
We keep envisioning these as 10th Avenue, as these sort of standalone buildings with their own associated parking lots and, but does like a small strip mall that provided these services fall into this category?
yes.
But not necessarily one that could have a restaurant
Right,
in
again,
that facility.
Right, but you
If-
could have a
if it
nail
were-
salon,
I see what you're
a
saying.
walk-in clinic, a physical therapist, and a,
If somebody wants to lease space
Architect.
to, for example, a restaurant where it was office space, they would not be permitted to do so in a C1. They would have to apply to have it rezoned to a C2. and it would be under the review of the planning and zoning and city council at that time.
If we get into a situation where somebody was developing like on the north side of 10th, they would rather go C2 because they have there's more of an ability to have more different types of businesses than there would be a C1. And so if they request it to be a C2 instead of a C1, would staff turn around and say, well, we think it should be a C1?
Here's how I'll address that. Typically, we redo our future land use plan after the census information comes up. That's scheduled to happen in 2020. So between now and then, we're really going to start thinking about that. I envision at the 2020 comprehensive land use plan update that we take that into consideration. We should ask that question. Should we put on our future land use map where we desire mainly service-type businesses as opposed to retail or restaurant use? You can call that out if you choose, although it gets a little tricky because then you're kind of predetermining how it'll develop. But that's an idea. So as staff, obviously we look at traffic management, hours of operation, the impact to the neighborhood. And in the end, a rezoning request would involve the neighborhood being notified, would require planning and zoning to take testimony, review, recommend, and then the council to have 3 readings on it. So I think it would be vetted pretty heavily.
Would it matter that, I think the area right to the north of where we're talking is R4 as well, isn't it? So that's one of those different neighborhoods we had where it's, before we made our adjustments to it, so it's kind of a interesting situation.
Well, that's why they went R4, they have the flexibility, so.
Right.
That's why this kind of brings into the C1, C2.
You'd want to be zone C2, more or less, so you could have
More
flexibility.
Yeah, and so that's where, it'll come in some pretty in-depth discussion, I'm sure, to what we would want to, or whatever the commission would want to see at that time.
Can you just remind me, if you look at the Cedar River Parkway, how is the land adjacent to that zoned? I just don't remember.
A lot of it's agricultural today. And so our future land use plan does call out sections of that to be mixed use and other parts on the north side, industrial or commercial. What that means is, should somebody come forward to rezone the property for a use, we would compare it to the comprehensive land use plan, look at traffic, how it's planned to circulate in the area. Can the city provide services, yes or no? And is there any detriment to the city growing that direction? That would be presented to staff and analyzed and brought forth to Planning and Zoning Commission for review and recommendation as well. So to answer your question simply, it's agriculturally zoned, but the future land use is showing it as mixed use or commercial.
Or industrial.
Or industrial. Thank you.
When I look at this and when I'm hearing, I have, as I always say, concern about governmental overreach and control. I like the business you're going to put in there, but Adam, I don't like yours, forget it. There's too much allowed in the way that this is being addressed. I think that the original, the old C1 is far more appropriate when we look at size requirement. There's only so much you can do with size. You can't drop you wouldn't be able to drop a 3-story office building in our traditional 2,000 square foot C1 lot. And to say that everything along 10th is or should be C1, I'll guarantee you I'd develop it as C2 so I have flexibility. David's entirely correct. So, I think we're creating a control issue that shouldn't be. It's up to the landowner within the clarity of the code, not the subjective opinion of this commission, the future commission, or employees of the city. So I'm not comfortable with the way we're really kind of addressing this.
So, Rich, may I ask you a question and follow up? So would you be as supportive of keeping the 2,000 square feet requirement to limiting structures to that size then, or to kind of attempt to do that? I don't know what you're
I-
offering maybe as a compromise.
I'm much more comfortable with that because that dictates how, the type of businesses that we want in small areas.
Small lots, small areas.
Small lot, small area, and that qualifies as C1. That makes sense to me. If, according to this, I could put a three-story office building in this, and I don't think that really makes sense in a C1. And to simply say, because you're supplied by a semi, we don't want you here, that's awfully subjective. And what if I grow too much? So I think we need to take subjectivity and bigotry, potential bigotry out of it.
But you always got a PUD if you got large enough space that you can circumvent everything else, really, too, couldn't you?
With review,
Well, yeah, but I mean, how are you going to, I mean, you're not going to do too much to negate that, I don't think, are you?
they would show, for example, in a planned development, they would show that list of criteria that we approved for the ordinance, which basically amounts to, they would show you how it's going to work, how the drainage will work, how traffic will work, screening and all that stuff.
It gives you the ultimate flexibility
Right.
if you got large enough space.
As long as you can essentially prove or show it in a site plan and have it recommended approval and have council approval, then I believe, yeah, I mean, it's gone through the process and it's been reviewed and it's good to go. Yep.
Right, that kind of goes against what you're, or not against, but for what you're saying, where you want to try to keep it limited, but you want to be a developer and flexibility, you know, I'm trying to figure out.
I'd go C2.
No, I know, and I'm trying to think back. I think Heidi talked about, you know, she'd rather see the Engelbrecht property be a C1, you know, and, but, you know, it goes to what you just got in saying, you don't want to have us dictating, you know. And so, I mean, it could become a kind of a controversial, you know, situation. Now, if we have it in the long-range plan, and people kind of know that up front, but they can always come in and ask for a change, too, so. I think what you're doing here, because anything in C1 will go into C2 anyway, right?
If somebody were to request it, it would be a zoning change request. They
No,
would
but I
have
mean
to
if-
formally request
Yeah, I
it.
mean, but in C2, if it was C2, you can do anything that's in C1,
That's correct.
you know, so I mean, it just kind of depends where you're going to put that C1, you know, if you really.
Well, just imagine the
long-range
C1.
plan.
Oh, sorry. to
Yeah, the long-range plan is, you know, where we would like to dictate it, but it doesn't mean they have to stay with it, you know, and we're kind of saying, okay, we would really like to see this as C1, and, you know, and people see that, but, you know, if a developer comes in, they can come in and ask it to change, and, you know, we may have a tough time, or the commission could have a tough time not doing that, you know, so.
But
I mean,
when-
it goes to what you're saying, you know, it's,
Our C1s today, you know, we have some C1s along Bremer.
We don't have C1 zoning, but we have C1 uses.
Right. And it makes sense, you know, you got some real small lots there in probably about the 700 block. It wouldn't work to be C2, or it'd be pretty unlikely today you'd be able to do it C2. That should be C1. The 10th Avenue, those lots are, in my mind, not C1 type lots. And I think a developer's going to make them C2 and then utilize it accordingly. If we want business growth, we don't want to, I think, pick and choose. And there's a lot of potential for that here, and we've been doing it for the last year or two.
But when you look, again, going back to 10th, all of those businesses along there, except the two guys, are C1 businesses. And the only building that really doesn't fit in along there, because it's a transition between residential going towards commercial, is the Two Guys. And you've got the big delivery trucks there. And it makes much more sense for that whole thing to be C1 and not have Two Guys there.
Would this come more into play, like if you go to, like Ames there, north of North Grand there, where they kind of started a whole other community with a kind of a downtown effect in the residential area, and where they, put in kind of like a small main street, and would this be where the C1 would fit into something like that?
Somewhat, and I know a little history on that project, because that started when I was in school there, and that's a long time ago now. That's all one private development, essentially. That's a
Oh,
planned
yeah.
development. But you're right, though, and what they did is they layered. They said, okay, our office-type uses are going to be in our downtown, and then you could put residential right behind that. Then you have your areas where it's, your C2-type restaurant usage and whatnot. But in other words, they tried to layer it so that if you're residential, you're not backing up to something that would, probably have large dumpsters at, late at night, large truck deliveries, which, to each their own, but I know that, I think their intent was to layer it so that it's more appealing and more desirable.
Yeah, I guess that's right. It would be that was a planned development, but it wouldn't be a C1, but that's where I kind of envisioned something along that lines, or where you have the C1.
What did we do with the driving range? What did we end up moving forward for zoning on that? Because that was a mix of
Yep.
residential, commercial, possibly.
Right, and basically what we approved is the amendment to the planned development. Before, it was called driving range / open space, because that was their requirement at the time for the development. What they did is they just said, this area shall be either multiple family or commercial. They didn't know at the time. So essentially, they approved the plan with it basically described as this area shall allow for multiple family or commercial. And then, because today's standards are now in effect, before they apply for a permit, we're going to expect to see how it'll work out. In other words, we want to see drainage, we want to see sidewalk connectivity, we want to see screening, buffering if it's necessary. How are they going to hold their stormwater in a retention basin or detention basin? So, yep.
I maybe missed it. I don't know if it's in another area, but where does it talk about C1s being 2,000 or the size? I don't see any of that in here unless I'm missing.
It used to be in there. I see now where I think I'm using a version that I simply omitted it rather than struck it, but it was in there initially.
Because I don't know that you really should limit it. For instance, if it is, like I look at some of the large medical clinic settings in Waterloo, there's big. They would still fit in that. So I don't know that, do we really have to say it can only be such and such a size? Because you could have a physical therapy, a massage group, and other things like that together that, are very C1 type uses.
Well, and the thing with C1, you're talking hospital, I mean, that's kind of tricky because our intent is to allow for clinics, and typically clinics,
And I'm not talking hospital, I'm saying pure clinic.
oh, I got you.
It might be another health service related to that. So yeah, hospital, hopefully there's more traffic than what we would want to see there.
The thing that's weird about this to me is that all of the designated uses in here are, the big change between what it was and what it has become is because all of these uses require significant parking lots.
By today's standards, at the time the code was written, you had your corner drugstore.
So all of a sudden, they're big by default because there are so many car requirements and parking lot requirements and then detention requirements. And it changes the kind of original concept, I think, that C1 originally held, which is I can walk down to the candy store or the laundromat and do my laundry. And those things don't exist anymore. So it just kind of begs the question of why you need a C1 at all. Because I think that, like 10th Avenue, even though those uses are permitted here, they're still going to look just like 10th Avenue.
And, sorry, I didn't want to.
No, I think I'm done. You can.
So the reason I'm proposing the C1 and the wording that we're using, we took a lot of this office-type application from the R4 district, meaning R4 district previously, before we amended it to apartment style only, basically included anything from single-family detached all the way to office use. I mean, anything in between. I mean, duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, whatever you basically wanted. We were attempting to add the element of a little more predictability when somebody applies to rezone a large tract of land to R4, you at least knew what they were talking about. There was no ambiguity, and you couldn't hold them to what they said they were going to do because things change. So we picked those up from that, and we basically put them here in C1. And so like you said, we realized too that, drugstore, variety store, laundrette, laundromat, I mean, those are typically uses that are, require traffic now. Most people drive to these places now. Pick up stuff, carry their sack out, and put it in their trunk.
So I guess where it makes me start to think is maybe size is the thing that changes it to C1. Because then you can really, it would limit anybody wanting to do it, I think, but it would only apply to small tracts of land that then you wanted to be commercial for some local use.
Well, and I think,
And I have to admit that I would wish that somewhere up by Horton Road, there was a place where I could go, pick up something, stop on my way home, but I can't, or walk to it even. But I don't want it to be developed like 10th.
And I think the attempt here was to provide a tool or a district that somebody could argue that type of use application for this lot may not be appropriate for C2 uses because of these factors. However, we have a C1, I'm going to, for example, decline the C2 request because we have a C1, and I would recommend, that could come out of these types of discussions. If you don't have this district, then you're permitting C2, which frankly could be just about anything because there is no site plan review. So C1 essentially would limit the uses per se that generally, again, the language of generally is in here, that would mirror these type of applications that aren't envisioned as having after hours type businesses or, which can be annoying, or have large parking demand after the hours of 8 to 5 or, so.
I think if you look at, what you've crossed off, drugstores, grocery stores, service stations, and you think about, again, 10th Avenue, and can you see CVS and Hy-Vee and, Quick Star along there? I mean, as somebody who's living right behind there, that's the last thing you want. I mean, what's there with, the dentist, the eye doctor, the bank are, quieter uses.
But it wouldn't be awful, in my opinion, I guess, if behind there was a small delicatessen or a limited size bank branch or,
I have a question. What is a delicatessen?
well, I know it doesn't exist anymore. I kind of wish it did. That's a separate issue.
What about
Again, just trying to
something-
define these uses, it was really hard.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is use is the approach that makes the most sense, or is size a better approach?
It's a good point.
So what about something like a Jimmy John's? Okay? Doesn't have, it's small, it doesn't have semis, it doesn't have a big seating arrangement, doesn't really have parking lot requirements. I mean, I'm not in any way suggesting that Jimmy John's wants in there or anything, but what, I'm just using it as an example, what would that fit with?
I guess I personally see that as C2 because you do have a lot of traffic. It might be a 5-minute visit or less, and their delivery is just constantly going from there. So I would think that would, to me, fit into the larger, the C2, or larger is incorrect, the busier C2.
You could argue that a financial institution has similar parking or similar car traffic.
You also have deliveries for food too.
Yeah, those are big trucks usually that.
Big trucks, yeah.
Well, I would hang my hat on the intent I'm providing. I mean, if you read that, that summarizes this district. I mean, you may pick uses and make an argument, but if it doesn't really meet the intent, I think it's a non-starter. That'd be really hard.
So what was the size again? How many square feet?
2,000 square feet is listed. If I can provide that.
That's really small. You couldn't, that's smaller than any clinic we own as a hospital.
That'd be like a 50 by 40 building.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, it's
so for
size of
some
an
of the
average
uses,
ranch.
it's not even an option. You couldn't ever do a church school. Why do we even bother putting that in there? Because at that size, you can't barely put a home on some of that, or, it's small. So to me, that makes it a non-starter.
Yeah, it's 2,000 square feet is tiny.
Yeah, so if we leave it at that, then, 70% of these uses aren't gonna necessarily fit in that. And economically, if you're gonna do a medical type of thing, you need some space to be able to do it, or you can't add on to it if you needed more.
Would Streets even fit that? That's,
No, it's way more than 2,000.
yeah,
Not with parking lot.
I'm sure it is, but
Our Shell Rock Clinic is 8,500 square feet.
Yeah, when I did the math, it's definitely larger than 2,000 square feet. I mean, all those buildings are. I mean, the average is probably 10,000, I think, is what I averaged. Because they have multiple, exam rooms and things like that. I mean, they just have a lot of space.
For our purposes tonight, why don't we try to get all of these ideas? You've got them logged on the tape from the meeting, but let's make sure we get all of that stuff in front of us. Ben, let's go back and take another look at it. For some of you who have specific things in mind, if you'd be kind enough to scratch those down and get them to Ben so that the intent and the language that you think is appropriate gets in there, it can at least be considered, and then we bring it back at our January 4 meeting and see if we can't get this thing finished.
And I just have, a quick
Please.
follow-up question for record's sake. So 2,000 square feet, is that something I'm hearing that we should include?
I think that's too small.
I think it's too small, too.
Okay, I was
I'm
just
just
trying
saying
to clarify what
size
you're
may
saying.
be an
Okay,
approach,
thank you.
but 2,000 square feet is probably not it.
And I would be agreeable to having what is it, 10,000 square feet? Is it, based on?
What's typical, current?
Yeah, I think we have to really look at that because it would be a non-starter.
Okay.
We seem to be making progress. Let's just check and see, are there any other thoughts about this? We haven't gone into any detail on dimensional requirements with the setbacks off the property lines and that. Is there anything there that needs a comment?
I have a code-based question that has to do with the back frontage being so limited. Isn't there a fire code issue where you have to be able to get a fire hose and a fire truck within a certain distance around the back of the building? And if you make it too tight in the back, you won't be able to do that?
Sounds like a good idea.
Potentially.
It's good.
Yeah, maybe we should look at that.
Mhm.
I'll double check with our building inspector on that.
Yeah.
There's a
Fire,
code
fire, it's code though, not building code.
Okay.
yeah, but he governs that part of it.
I'm sorry?
Doesn't he actually, they have to meet that code when the building inspector checks to make sure that they meet that code, doesn't they?
I can check on that and follow up.
Further on that, given that C1 is often going to be near residential areas, and according to this, you can have a pretty large office building which would have significant dumpster usage, I think we need at least that 25-foot back. rather than reduce it to 10, because you want some space between that business and the residential area.
And so the question I'll ask then is, what do you think of the height then, structure height? 3 stories, 48 feet? If you reduce that to the 2 stories, you would obviously reduce the impact to the neighborhood, I would think, further, but just my thought.
That was actually going to be my next point. I think we need to, in looking at C1, C2, beyond, we need to address height. The reality is, more and more land is not being made. You're going to have to go up. To limit everything to 48 feet may stifle our ability to grow. And if somebody wants to come in and develop along 10th, a business park, they may well want to go 8 stories. And all of our code today limits that height, and I think that is not necessarily in the best interest long-term. So that's something I think we need to be prepared to address, whether it's on this one or in the near future if we're going to go forward with C2 and beyond.
How about other contributions?
Well, thank you for kind of looking at this somewhat abstract kind of concept, but again, we're trying to design a district that is meeting the intent, that the uses should somewhat mirror the intent. Again, we're trying to, when we've researched other communities, these are very, very close. Again, other communities allow a lot more permitted uses, such as restaurants and things like that, but we already permit those in C2, and I don't think that that's really the intent of the C1. It's meant as kind of an in-between. So, I mean, that's why it's not in there. And so I think with what I've heard tonight, I will research that more, try to address most of what I've heard.
Ben, just to make your work possible, when would you like to have anything that any member, any commissioner might want to send in?
You can do it basically up till the meeting date. I mean, that's fine, up till January 4.
Okay, I mean, you've got materials to prepare, though, and
Yeah. I mean, well, sure. I mean, obviously sooner rather than later, so I would say
about the
the
end,
next 2 weeks,
end of December or next 2 weeks. Let's pick something that's reasonable.
say December 15, a week from tomorrow.
How's that? It'll be fresh
Gives you
in
a
people's
weekend and a half
minds?
to think about.
Okay. Commission all right with that?
Yep.
It's good discussion. Okay. I'm going to move away from this and go to the next item on the agenda is old business, and we show we have none. Any new business? Do I hear a motion?
Move we adjourn.
We are adjourned. Hey, thank